really thrilled to have a panel discussion where we can delve a little bit deeper into some of the personal motivations for the people involved in this space, and also some examples and case studies of what they're actually doing. I'd love to call up our panel, please, if you could please come up. And rather than me actually go through and introduce each person, we'll start off by each person introducing themselves. So please come up. In your order. Let's see who can follow the instructions and sit in the right place. First test.
IQ test.
Yeah, IQ test. Great. So I think what's really fantastic about this panel that we have here today, before I get them to each introduce themselves, is that we have a mix of both Australian and Israeli people, but also that they're coming from different parts of the ecosystem. So we've got a VC, we've got somebody who's part of the peak body overseeing and trying to build the ecosystem in Australia. We've got Jackie from a corporate philanthropic foundation. We've got Grant, who's actually an intermediary in this space and an investor, and Karen, who very interestingly have, together with her husband, have set up their own private impact investment fund. So we've got lots of different perspectives here. So I might go through and just start each of you. Sandrine, we have heard from you about Bridges Israel, but it'd be great to hear why you actually got involved in this space.
Thank you, Amanda. It's a great question. I'm not an investor professional. I spent most of my career in management and started in brand management, Procter & Gamble, then general management in fast-moving consumer goods and medical device startups. I think what was the key differentiator for me in making such a big shift into the impact space was actually meeting Sir Ronald. That happened 1.5 years ago. He was thinking of co-founding Bridges Israel, and he was looking for people from the management space to join the team. And when I met him, I started to read about impact and started to get more involved. And I figured out that as we grow older, we start by thinking about the me, and then when we have a family, we start thinking about the we, and at a certain point, we also start thinking about the bigger picture, the us. And I heard this example from a friend of mine, and I really felt that it describes the path that I've been following. So that was it for me.
And Dan, a little bit about also what led you into this space and your background, and then also what Impact Investing Australia does.
Sure. So I spent 13 years at JB Weir and Goldman Sachs JB Weir. I left there, so I was acting CEO of JB Weir for the last 8 months that I was there, and missed out on the permanent job, so I decided that I threw my toys out of the cot and had a big hissy fit. No, I didn't really do that. I decided after 13 years it was probably about time that I'd move on and go do something else. I thought that would be in private equity, and so when I left in 2014, I thought it would take me 6 months to go and find the right team to go and join. I might as well make myself useful. I went and worked at Foundation for Young Australians for a couple of days a week. Jan had me there doing a couple of projects, and I walked in there, saw all of these amazing young social entrepreneurs, probably the first one or two. I mean, I cannot believe how arrogant I was. Like the first one or two, I think I probably literally kind of gave them a little pat on the head and said, "Well done, son. That's cute. Go. That's wonderful. Change the world." And And it wasn't until I realised that they were, and it was a shocking moment for me. That I actually thought, gee, they've actually got a really good business here. Like, this is a genuinely good business, and they are genuinely going to do something good with that business. And I think the intellectual curiosity for me has been the thing that has, apart from the purpose bit, which I think we all are looking for, but someone used a great example or analogy around social enterprise being like Ginger Rogers and startups being like Fred Astaire. They both do the same steps, but one has to do them backwards and in 6-inch heels, right? The idea of not just solving a business problem or doing a startup or investing, which is hard enough as it is, but actually trying to use that to have meaningful impact is just a whole new level of trying to problem solve. And that intellectually is just incredibly curious for me.
And at Impact Investing Australia, your role there?
So I run Impact Investing Australia. We were ourselves a startup non-profit 2 years ago, so I joined as the first employee, and we have been doing a lot of work in really field building, ecosystem building in Australia. So how do we help more people navigate this space, understand what it is, so that's education, it's convening, it's doing media stuff, it's awareness raising, it's all of those things. We also do a lot of policy work, so both at state and federal levels around how government could support the development of this, because obviously some of the value capture is actually public, so they should have an interest in supporting how this market develops. And thirdly, we've spent a lot of time in thinking about some of the gaps, like what could we do to accelerate the development of this market. And we've worked on projects like the Impact Investment Readiness Fund, for example, where that NAB seeded with nearly $2 million of grant funding, and we use that to pay for the corporate, to pay for the advice that entrepreneurs need to get their business investment ready.
Great. And Jackie?
I'm a little bit like you, Sandrine. I sort of started off in corporate and I stumbled into corporate sustainability, and then I was just a sucker for life because it sort of brought my love of working in those big companies with really purpose work. And I think you can sort of, the way I see it is that you become sort of a social activist in a corporate using their resources for good. So that's sort of my backstory on that one. And now I head up the Telstra Foundation, and we're in a really lucky position in the foundation in that Telstra funds us to do what we call Tech for Good. And we have 3 programs. We look at funding young people into digital making, so coding, robotics, 3D printing, with the impact being that we want young people to create with tech, not just consume it, and potentially become developers or become design thinkers, you know, hackers, hipsters, hustlers. The second one is looking at tech for good innovation. So how do we partner with social not-for-profit enterprises that are really tech savvy, are doing really cool things with digital, and how can we help them on that journey? And the third piece is looking at how can we lift the capability of the not-for-profit sector in terms of their skills and expertise in doing digital better. So that's the 3 things that we look at.
Great. Grant?
So my journey to impact investing, I was a transactional lawyer and I've been managing partner of one of the law firms here for quite some time, and was extremely fortunate to have a wonderful coach out of London, and we spent years and years talking about KPIs and 30-day plans and reports, and then one day he said to me, we're going to talk about you and your purpose. And I was dumbstruck. I could not answer him. I was like, what do you mean my purpose? I want to be a good father, a good husband, blah, blah, blah. No, what's your real purpose? And we spent a lot of time uncovering that, and it has layers in it, but one of the layers made me come to the realisation that I really wanted to put my skills that I'd learnt over decades as a transactional lawyer to really good use and make a real impact, a positive difference using those skills. And then leading to impact investing, and this was the formation of Blue River Group, of which I'm a partner. My other partner is here, who we'd known each other for 30 years. We'd been talking about our journeys. He'd left Macquarie Bank and he said, have you heard of impact investing? And I said, no. And he gave me a whole bunch of papers to read on a plane to a board meeting in London. But literally by the time I got off the plane, I went, that's it. That's what I'm looking for. Somewhere where we can do things that I love, which is transactions, but rather than doing it in the way I'd done it before, doing it with a real lens of making a positive and intentional difference. So that led to the formation of our company, Blue River Group. So Blue River Group's genesis is impact investing, as you've heard today, is a new market. And our view is that every new market needs intermediaries to bring all the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle to make those deals work. So at Blue River Group, we really focus on 3 core things. We create, so we'll incubate and create ideas, investments, products that have financial return and obviously the impact. We advise, so impact advisory to foundations and other people who are looking for measurement and other pieces. And then we also finance, so we'll bring the capital, whatever that may look like, to impactful deals. And then the final arm of our business is we commercialise impactful ideas. So we're working with universities and entrepreneurs to take fantastic science out of those bodies and create businesses that have an impact. And interestingly, our website, for anyone who looks on it for BR Impact Innovations, has a bridge to Israel. So we've spent a lot of time in Israel, and we're really focused on, we were fascinated and taken aback by the ecosystem in Israel of innovation and startup. And we're really looking to see how we can bridge the gap in Australia and in Israel in innovation, in particular the ag space. And I'll talk about some things with practice that we're doing at the moment.
Lots of bridges being built everywhere. Karen?
Yeah, A little bit of a similar story to Grant, actually. I started my professional career in law, and my husband was in economics, and so we worked for about 10 years here and abroad in law firms and education companies, getting a broad range of experience. And then we came back to Australia, and much to our family's horror, decided we'd throw away our well-paying, secure jobs and backed ourselves in starting our own enterprises. And then over the course of about 9 years, we built, bought and sold 2 education companies. The first called Think Education and the second Open Colleges. And both of those businesses grew very fast and had lots of challenges, but they were great success stories, and we decided the timing was right to exit those businesses. So that was a natural point for us to reflect on, well, what's the next part of our story? What do we want to do with our lives? And so we founded Pangaea, which seeks to deploy capital into great businesses, but with even greater social missions. And so we focus on sort of 3 areas at the moment, although we've only been on this journey about a year. So we're focusing on education, disability and Indigenous literacy and health.
Fantastic. I think just to take it a step further, and it is interesting, Dan, the common thread around purpose and actually, being involved in using your skills to actually, to give something back, create something good, support businesses to do well. It'd be great to give a bit more context to the group. If we could just have an example of something that each of you have been involved with, either investing in, supporting to get investment, or that type of thing. So, Sandrine?
So I think that in terms of investments, I can only talk about Bridges UK because Bridges Israel is still in
unless you've got one
foundation.
from Bridges Israel.
But Bridges Israel, we are of course building our deal flow as we are raising the fund. And one of the most interesting example that I can give is if you look at the Galilee in Israel, you have a lot of small artisanal producers of honey, olive oil, jams. They are from very diverse backgrounds. So some of them are Jewish, some of them are Christian Arabs or Muslim Arabs or Druze. And they all produce in their backyards, more or less, and they sell to restaurants in their village or, to boutique hotels, etc. Now, this seasoned entrepreneur that we are talking to, he already created and sold to retail chains, so he's very experienced. And he decided to create a global marketing and branding platform for these producers. So he owns the brand, so that's the value creation in his business. And he helps the producers reach constant quality. He also helps the producers increase their production capacity and capabilities. And he is creating global marketing and selling channels for these guys. And by doing so, he creates bigger revenues in the area. He creates a lot of economic activity around it, and he's not replacing their previous channels, he's only adding to it. Now, in the UK, they found that every dollar invested in an underserved area is generating $5 in activity around it. If you look at supplying or procuring goods and services in employment, etc. So there's a huge multiple when you create economic activity in an underserved area. And that's what we are aiming to create with this investment.
And once you have investment and you report back to investors, you'll be reporting not only on the financial outcomes,
Absolutely.
but also on that ripple effect.
Every single investment of Bridges worldwide is defined by very, very clear impact KPIs at the beginning. So when you make the selection, you already decide which impact KPIs are going to be measured. Is it employment? Is it CO2 emissions? Is it education goals? Very, very clear KPIs are being defined at the at the pre-investment stage. And these KPIs are being tracked and measured and reported back to investors regularly alongside financial reporting. So if you look at the typical Bridges annual report, you will see for every single investment a financial reporting and an impact reporting together, not separate, together. So that's the whole idea.
Excellent, thank you. Dan?
I'm not going to steal Ability Mate if I talk about it, am I? Is that
No,
what you're planning to talk
I'll
about?
go higher.
Okay,
I'll do the
okay,
echo bit.
Good. I'm going to use them because I only saw them this morning. So I met with 2 entrepreneurs this morning who are amazing, and they have a business called Ability Mate, which 3D prints assistive devices for people with disabilities. So they're focused at the moment on orthotics for kids with cerebral palsy. So if you're a child with cerebral palsy, you need splints on your ankles and your feet to make sure that your bones don't grow crooked. There's a lot of problems with those. A lot of kids do not have access to those to effective orthotics. Often they either have to stay in them for too long, so they become too small and the kids' feet get scarred, or they get made too large because it takes so long to see the orthotist. The orthotist often makes them too large so that they can grow into them before they have to, we'll get in to see the next appointment. So that's not cool. That is a very bad outcome. I think we all agree on that. If you look at the reasons for that, one, it can take up to 12 months to get in to see an orthotist because there's not enough of them. Two, the actual process for making the current orthotics is unfortunately quite traumatic for the kids and parents. They still use, pin the kid down, plaster cast their leg, grind it off, and then use that. These are 2 and 3-year-old kids. Use that as to then mould the splint. And 3, it's still manually, it's handmade, so it can take 1 or 2 months to actually get the thing then sent to you. So they've come up with technology. They can use a scanner. So it's non-invasive. Literally, it takes a couple of seconds to scan the kid's leg. They then use that to create a virtual mould of which they then 3D print, and they can get that out to the child within 48 hours.
And it's far cheaper as well, isn't it?
Yeah, so they're reducing the cost of these devices by up to 10 times.
Yeah.
Wow. So it's pretty phenomenal what they're doing. I mean, where they're at is they obviously with medical devices you need to go through the process of getting all of the right checks, and which I'm not an expert in, but they're going through that process at the moment. So they've partnered with some big disability service organisations to go through that process through the trials. But the idea is once they've proven that, they'll go to raise capital probably this time next year.
Great, thank you. Jackie?
And very much linked to Ability Mate, Telstra has invested in Remarkable, which is an incubator that looks at how can we help startups that are working in the disability space, of which one of them is Ability Mate. And this is, I guess, for us, a sort of a social impact investment in capability and making sure that these startups can be ready for the next round of investment. So they go through a process, like a boot camp really, and we're really proud of the 4 startups that have gone through already. I think we've had 1,000 volunteer hours from skilled people mentoring them, and we've also had 10 prototypes for another activity that we've done in partnership with Cerebral Palsy Alliance. So it's been a really terrific experience.
Some amazing startups.
Oh, they're amazing. There's another one called Sound Scouts, which is these guys have invented an app that you can give to a child to play. It's a game, and it actually detects hearing loss. And so it gives you this instantaneous, yes, you have a hearing problem, which of course affects learning ability. So it's a fantastic operation.
Yeah,
so
and these are all businesses, they all generate financial returns, but at the same time, they're actually solving these social problems.
Social problems, yeah.
That's great. Grant?
So our impact investment, I should wind back, when we started, we were very much in the Sir Ronald Cohen profit with purpose. Every investment that Blue River looks at, we have to pass those 2 filters that Bridges talked about. There's got to be the clear economic return that's not compromised, and the impact measurement, which we look at upfront and then we'll absolutely report on for all of our investments. But we started with a thesis that ag sector in Australia was one that was undercapitalised and was a hugely impactful sector, given food sustainability, food waste, and needing to double the amount of produce that we grow between now and the next 20 odd years to feed the world. And that's what took us to Israel to look at their ag tech sector. And that then opened our eyes to something we weren't actually looking for, which was the dairy sector. We actually went over looking at horticulture, and Israel's one of the most efficient producers of peppers, and that was sort of a lot of what we're looking at the RFR. But we got introduced to a dairy farm, and that sort of opened our eyes to Israeli technologies in that sector. And then roll forward 18 months, we've completed the acquisition of a dairy processing business in Wagga called Riverina Fresh, which is an iconic milk brand, which we've bought off Fonterra, which principally supplies quality milk to cafes. It's the barista milk, or choice of milk for baristas, and probably being used here. It obviously passed the financial metrics. I won't even talk about that, but we're super excited about the impact opportunities that business brings, and it brings it at a number of levels. There's impact at the plant, so it's one of the largest employers in rural communities, so supporting regional communities and rural communities and growth in that sector. And secondly, we think at the plant there's a whole range of efficiencies and other impactful ideas that we can build into the operation of that plant that we will be reporting on down the road. The second impact that we think is really exciting is working with the dairy farming industry in that region. And you'll have all read the press about the way dairy farmers have been treated in Australia, and many of them going out of business. And one of the key criteria that attracted us to this investment was the fact that this business pays its farmers very differently to the way some of the Murray Goulburns and others that you've seen in the press pay. So we felt this, owning a physical asset, was a great platform to really influence the whole supply chain from the paddock all the way to the supermarket of sourcing of milk. So in addition to that, in addition to the plant, we're working with a very small dedicated group of farmers to talk to them about how can we make your business more sustainable and to bring impact to real life. My partner and I were down there talking to the farmers last week, and we met one farmer who's turning 75 next year. He supplied the plant forever, and his father before him, with 4 children, 3 of whom were there, and he was talking about selling up the farm because it's, the kids think it's too hard. And we talked about our plans for the business, but in addition to that, the idea of how can we bring Israeli innovation and technology to the farmland in Australia to improve their efficiency, to improve their profitability, to make their jobs not as physically demanding and actually make it a business rather than a labour, and make therefore the next generation of Australians want to go onto the farm as a meaningful business. And we've just been amazed by the openness and willingness of these farmers to embrace that technology. So we see down the road now a really massive opportunity to create a real impact in that dairy farming community and the generations to come from that.
Great, thank you. Karen?
The example I'd like to give is we've been supporting a for-profit enterprise in India called Pollinate Energy. And Pollinate was started by some young, passionate Australians, and they are providing products to India's urban poor, in people living in slums. There's quite a lot of NGOs and stuff working out in rural India, but some of the cities get forgotten. So one of their key products they swap out is people who burn kerosene for light and fuel. They swap that out to a solar light. They're operating in 4 cities, and just there's lots of things I like about Pollinate. Obviously, I just think in 2016, if you can stop people dying from kerosene poisoning unnecessarily, you can swap it out for a cheaper, cleaner, greener alternative. That just makes good sense. I like their business model in that it's empowering, so it's not foreigners arriving into India and pushing products onto locals. They employ local people who they call pollinators. So they work in their own communities and develop those relationships. And as a result of that, they have very low default rates. And the third aspect that I like is that they have an education program where they allow young professionals and graduates to go in-country and experience working and being in a social enterprise firsthand. And that's great for a graduate, and that's great for Pollinate on the ground, obviously. So, yeah, for all those reasons, we've supported it. I know that doesn't sound like any of the criteria I originally set up of education, disability or Australian Indigenous, but I think one of the advantages of being an investment committee of 2 Means I can pivot into something if I'm really impressed by something. And those group of Australians just really impress me and are just doing good.
Fantastic. I think one of the things I'd love to explore, given the international flavour to this discussion, is I know one of the things, Dan, that Impact Investing Australia, one of the reports you came out with last year, showed that in Australia there's a lot of capital, there's a lot of investors looking to invest into this space. And at the moment there's a shortage of deal flow. So there's a shortage of investor-ready deals that people can actually, make the investments if they're actually wanting to make these investments where there's a social and environmental and financial return. I'm just wondering whether, and also Grant, touching on what you said about bringing some of the Israeli innovation here, and Sandrine, the opportunities you have available, different ways that we could perhaps, enhance the collaboration in this space between Israel and Australia, because I know there are a lot of opportunities in Israel in this space. A lot of the Israeli startups, we had one impact pitch up here from Erin, but a lot of the Israeli startups, and I remember noticing this at the Bridge last year, inherently are solving social and environmental problems. So I'm just wondering whether there's a way that we can bring the two ecosystems together, because I know from being in Israel recently, the Israeli ecosystem is at a very similar stage to us as well. So I wonder whether, Sandrine, you have any ideas
I think
on
it's
that?
a great question. We see collaboration on several fronts possible. First of all, the simplest collaboration is by, of course, injecting capital in both markets, because both markets can deploy this capital in a very efficient manner for investors. But another front where this cooperation can bear fruits, of course, one is the Tech for Good system, where technologies for disabilities or technologies for agrotech and all the things that we heard from the different speakers throughout the day, those are classic areas of collaboration. So Australian investors can invest in different vehicles that all will arrive to the same entrepreneurs. So they can either invest directly in the startups, or they can invest via, one of the funds that are operating in this space. And for us, the bigger the space, the better. So the more money flows into that space, the better. Another area where collaboration is very meaningful, there are challenges that are very similar in Australia and in Israel. I'll give you a specific example: elderly care. In the Western world, elderly care needs to be reinvented. The old models of nursing homes and assisted living and all the technology, those areas need to be evolved. And in Israel, we are looking at some very innovative solutions to this population. For example, we are looking at an investment in that is a collaboration between real estate in the kibbutzim in the north. So the kibbutzim in the north, they have a lot of real estate that is not deployed because that is not used because it's very old, and the young families don't want, to live in those old places that belonged to their grandfather. So with a little bit of capital, those places can be refurbished according to the latest regulations and the latest standards of elderly care. Then there is the second partner in this venture is the leading operator in nursing homes in Israel, who will provide a lot of know-how and operational capabilities. And then, of course, an impact fund that will provide the capital. And by doing so, you will provide a new model of elderly living in a community, full of young people, full of in nature, and not in a nursing home, in the middle of a big city. We know that people that live far away from their families are not visited often enough. So if you have to drive more than half an hour to see your grandfather, you will not do it. You will do it once a year on his birthday, but you will not see him every weekend. And if it's someone that lives 15 minutes from you, you will do, and this contact is very, very important. So I don't want to go into too much details, but I know that the challenges with taking care of the elderly population are very similar in Australia and in Israel. And by being an investor in this space, you can transfer know-how from one market to the other. So if you invested in such a facility in Israel, you can then do the same in Australia and vice versa.
And ground in agriculture, it's probably a similar story.
I think so. Collaboration is something that's sort of core of our DNA, and I wanted to firstly touch on that as a cultural issue, and then come to practical. So I think it's actually interesting if you look at the background of us sitting up here. Most of us, and I think it's typical for many of us in this new market, come from the corporate, financial, legal world, and frankly, collaboration is an anathema in that sector. I mean, for an investment banker to say to a Goldman Sachs banker to say, let's collaborate with JP Morgan or AMP Capital to collaborate, it's saying we're drilled not to do. So we think as a culture, we need to embrace collaboration to make this sector work. And it's something that I think the Israelis do really, really well. And I think that we are learning, and I'm learning. I think as we started our journey, you know, we talk about an idea, or don't talk about that with someone else. And it's sort of getting yourself used to saying, well, I'm going to share that because other people will have great ideas. So culturally, I think for us to succeed in this space, we do need to get over that collaboration bridge and actually do it. Secondly, in terms of practicality, I think the one way to collaborate is real assets on the ground and true collaboration. So if you look at Israel, for those who are familiar with it, in the Arava, there's the Moshavs, and then within the Arava and within they're scattered throughout Israel, there's communal or combined R&D centres. So the universities and the farmers work together with test farms and demonstration farms. And a good example is they need to get strawberries into the European market 2 weeks earlier because a competitive nation's bringing their strawberries to market 2 weeks earlier. So they, through those centres, will research and then apply that research for the benefit of all farmers. So we think there's a real opportunity here to do that. So using our investment in the Riverina, creating an Israeli demonstration farm, creating a research centre or a collective hub that the farmers can utilise. So combining the physical asset with the relationships in Israel and here and bringing it onto the ground for practical purposes, we think is a way to make a real difference.
Great, and I know with Telstra also, Jackie, with Murudi, and I know Annie will talk a bit more about this tomorrow. I know the kind of incubator, contribution to the ecosystem, which is so important. I know that Murudi's been over to Israel as well and has a connection there too.
That's right, yeah. And I think that's really important in terms of what you said about the collaboration. There's just so much opportunity to just scale things when we work together. And I guess, for me, I feel a bit of a sort of a fraud being up on this panel because we don't actually do social impact investment. We do philanthropic investments. So we don't actually aim for that financial return. But I think if we can collaborate, we can work out the bit of the system that we can add some value in, and so that capacity building is a piece that we can add value there and put some investment into. So I think it's a really good point.
Yeah, and I know in Israel they're also trying to build the ecosystem down the same way you are here. There's a lot of work going on in Israel to actually build the ecosystem as well as raise funds and get investment. So it's at a very similar stage. I'd love to just open up for some questions. You've all been listening for quite a long time to lots of different kind of sessions as we've gone through this whole Impact Nation stream. Does anyone have any questions? Great.
I'm fairly new to this. My name's Ben Raw, I'm from Eve Investments. Lens was used a lot in this discussion, and lenses come in all shapes and sizes and different colours. I'm just interested from your perspective how you choose your investments and what sort of lens that you put across them, because in terms of impact, I'm sure everyone knows you're impact investors, so you're probably pitched from everyone with a social impact in mind. And how do you then determine whether they meet your lens?
Who would like to answer that?
I can have a crack at from a philanthropic perspective. I mean, we have a program logic, so that guides us in terms of the areas that we want to focus investment on. We have investment criteria. We have we look at very specific areas and we keep the focus really, really tight because that's how we can get some impact with the money that we have. But in terms of the area that you work in, Dan, you probably have a broader...
I mean, we work with a lot of different types of investors. So obviously the lens that you apply, depending on the type of investor you are and the freedom that you have to apply your different size or coloured lens. If you're an industry super fund and have to get through investment committees and a board of trustees and all of the rest of it, that's a trickier way to navigate this space than if you're a high net wealth individual who can make their own decisions based on whether they like the entrepreneurs and the company or not. So I think it does depend on where you sit and what type of investor you are. For me personally, the financial piece kind of will stack up or it will not for you, right? So everyone has their own way of approaching that issue. The way I like to start with things is just starting really simply with what problem are they trying to solve for who, right? So what problem is this entrepreneur trying to solve from a social perspective, that lens perspective? What problem are they trying to solve and for who? Because sometimes that then dictates, like investing doesn't solve the social problem, right? Investing solves the resourcing issue of how to solve that social problem. So if you start with what the problem is, then that person's got a theory of change. They've got an intervention that they want to make to stop that problem from occurring. The next thing back from that is, okay, well, how do we resource that? Because sometimes philanthropy is the right way to resource it. Sometimes government funding is the right way to resource it. Sometimes private capital is the right way to resource it. And there are times where we use philanthropy where it's a terrible way to resource a solution, particularly if you're wanting to drive a particular incentives, right? If someone is creating a business, wants to run a business where they're employing young homeless people, well, you want that business to operate sustainably, right? So actually introducing financial discipline, all the things that capital comes with investment capital actually creates really good incentives for that business, right? Versus if you're dealing with an issue of disaster relief, right? Probably don't want to come up with a business model around that. We probably just need to get aid on the ground when that happens. Okay, so I think it depends on what problem you're trying to solve for who, and you kind of work backwards from there about thinking about the types of capital that you could use to resource that.
Oh, did you want to say?
Yeah, I just want to add the perspective of an impact investment fund that has a profit with purpose charter rather than some of the other examples that we heard here. Your lens is defined by your focus, your impact themes. So if you decide that your impact themes is about employment, you define it very carefully. So it has to be either in an area where there's a high unemployment or among a certain population that experiences high unemployment. And you define KPIs, very clear KPIs, what kind of impact is this business going to generate in unemployment or in education or skills? And once this business meets those criteria, then again, from our perspective, you change your hat and you become an investor. And then you look at this business from a financial perspective. Does it have the right team, the right business model, the right growth potential? And does it meet your financial criteria for investments? So the lens is defined by the scope and and what you define as impact within your specific area of expertise.
Can I maybe add one comment, Amanda? Just sort of kind of related to that, but I think it's a really important point, especially for people in the room who are newer to this space. So certainly our approach is, and I think it's really important to not think of impact investment as an asset class.
Yeah.
Because if it is an asset class, it's kept into a very small slither of the available capital markets. And when you wind back to what Sir Ronald Cohen said of all the different guises that impact can take, I think it's important to see it as an overlay. So all we are talking about here today are commercial investments, but that have an additional layer put on it or lens put on it as you described it to define whatever the appropriate impact that each organisation or body will have a different view on. My second point is I think pragmatism here is really important. One of the critical things is getting transactions at number and at scale, i.e. at a size where we can start to attract institutional capital. And to do that, we have to be very realistic and pragmatic and not get too caught up in definitions. And we need to define and characterise it, but we also need to be realistic and practical about how we do that.
Fantastic, that's great. Jono, you have a question?
Yeah, g'day. Hello, can you hear me? My question's about public money, Australia and Israel. And Dan, you put up a slide where in the impact investing space, if you're sort of leaning more on impact, I would imagine you're starting to talk about suicide prevention, health outcomes, education outcomes that save the government money. And aside from sort of grants, firstly, how intelligent are grants, government grants? And is there any models coming forward where government's actually investing, on an equity basis, or they're matching funding depending on savings or outcomes? How sophisticated is public money?
I can explain social impact bonds in 2 minutes if that kind of works.
Thank you.
Hands up if you actually know how a social impact bond works. Or would you like to know how one works?
Please.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, really what you're talking about is probably the mechanism or the financing instrument that's being used most specifically to what you've just described are social impact bonds. Okay, now, to put it in the scale context that Grant just touched on, there's 2 of them in Australia, 3 if you kind of count the NAB one that was done, but that was only 1 investor, so it's not publicly issued. And this, I think there's about 70 globally now. You would know that better than I do, Sandrine. Okay.
30.
Oh, is it only 30?
Yeah.
Okay, right. So, and they're relatively small scale. $5 to $10 million is probably the sort of average transaction size, right? But the concept behind them, and to use a real example, you're Uniting Care Burnside. You run out-of-home care kind of services for the government.
Not-for-profit.
Non-profit organisation, right? And you're getting great results in working intensively with the natural families of those kids to return them to a safe family environment. That's best outcome for everyone. All the stats will tell you. I don't need to go into it now, right? But if you can get the kids back into their natural family in a safe family environment, better outcome for every taxpayer from here for the next 40 years. Okay? Best outcome for the kids, best outcome for the families. You come to me, I'm New South Wales government, and you say, I know every one of those kids costs you 60 grand a year, okay, to have them in my care, to have them in your care, rather, as United Care Burnside. How about you, and we're getting great results from this program to return them. Why don't you give me $10 million to really scale up this program? And I look at you and I say, I love your program, right? And I want to support you, but A, I don't have $10 million because no government's got any spare money at the moment. And 2, it's a bit of a bum trade for me because if I give you the $10 million and you don't get the results, 1, I've sunk $10 million, and 2, I've still got the $60,000 for every kid that you did not return to foster care on my books next year. Okay, so what I say to you is, but how about we do this? How about, I agree, it costs me $60,000 a year. Why don't we enter into a payment by outcomes contract, right? So for every child that you can prove you have returned to a safe family environment, as determined by the courts, not either of us, I will pay you a success fee, okay, out of those cost savings. So I've got $60,000 to play with, maybe I give you 40 grand, okay? So if we stop there, that's a payment by outcomes contract, and it is where governments around the world are trying to move commissioning to, right? It's not easy for them. There's all sorts of tricks and the system is not really necessarily set up to do that. But that's where, if you want to think about effective use of public dollars, you pay for what works, right? Pay for prevention. The challenge in that is you, as Uniting Care Burnside, used to get paid, if you say yes to that contract, you used to get paid every year. I give you the grant up front. Now you're only going to get paid when you deliver results in a year or two's time. What do you do for working capital? How do you run that program? Does that make sense to everybody, right? So what you do is you go to private investors, raise the $10 million as a social impact bond, right? That gives you your working capital to run the program. If you get the results, I as government pay you the success fee, you pass that back to investors, okay? And so the power of that is that we are all aligned in that value chain, okay? So best outcome for the child, best outcome for the family, best outcome for the taxpayer because I'm saving money every time one of those children get a return. Best outcome for the government, gets votes. Best outcome for the organisation because you're delivering your mission. And best outcome for the investor because you get paid, your return is linked to how many of those children get returned. So that's a real life example that's been going for 3 years. Average returns over that 3 years have been 12%, I think, from memory. I should know that. 130 children have been returned to their families and about 70 children have been prevented from going into out-of-home care.
And that's 12% to private investors.
To private investors, as a coupon, yeah.
We've probably got time for if there's one more quick question and then we'll have to wrap up. Anything? No? One more,
Okay. I'll try to make it very quick.
and we'll try to do a quick answer.
I'm from the Chief Scientist Office in Israel, and we certainly see increasing awareness of the impact community and those opportunities. But I still find a lot of companies, aren't aware of those opportunities, and they might have a technology that could be really applicable in this space, and could really be for good, but they're not thinking in that direction, or they're not using it in that way. And so I'm kind of interested to know, how do we, it's kind of an outreach question, I guess, but whose role is it to, reach out to these companies and get them to start thinking, maybe this could be also, for good and you can still make money. How can you adjust and adapt your product for these markets, affordable products for emerging markets and developing markets? So that's something that I've been struggling with, and I'm very interested to hear your out.
So I think that Sir Ronald referred to it when he said that impact investors, part of their job is to identify businesses that are doing that they are doing exactly that, even if originally the impact is not embedded in their business model, because without knowing it, they are creating measurable, positive social and environmental impact. So the investor in this respect will identify that this business is creating measurable social and environmental impact, and will help the management team and the company after the investment phase embed that impact into the mission statement, into the business model, in a way that they go hand in hand, the lockstep concept. So the more money the business makes, the more successful it is, the higher, the greater the impact it creates. And that's partly the role of the investment vehicle. It can be the social bond, it can be the investment fund, and it can be also a private investor that does that with his own mission-aligned capital.
It is a little example of that actually happened with the Remarkables Accelerator, which the Telstra Foundation and the New South Wales Government backed, which is an accelerator just in the disability space. And Ability Mate that Dan spoke about went through that. We actually, my husband Quentin and I actually went to speak to their group of entrepreneurs who all have disability-focused businesses to explain to them there is this thing called impact investing, and when you're ready to raise capital, there's actually a group of people looking to invest in your type of business. And they couldn't believe it. They just said, do you mean someone will actually value what we're doing and want to actually invest? So I think there's actually just getting out there and talking about it is great. Yeah. On that note, these guys will be around, so please come and talk to them. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Great discussion. Thank you.